We'll be
Yeah.
fine.
Good evening and welcome to the Maple Plain City Council special meeting on December 5th at 7 p.m. I call the meeting to order. Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I am looking for a motion to adopt this evening's agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Cahill,
Second.
second by Francis. Any further discussion?
I have a discussion or a question to ask, and that is, I'm questioning why the second part of the agenda is on this meeting for tonight. We specifically, as a council, asked the Planning Commission to take a look at that, to look at the discussion about the sign ordinance, which drives the decision about what to do on a variance to that. And that went to Planning Commission last week, and their recommendation doesn't come back to this council until the next meeting. I question why that agenda item's on tonight.
So when we brought it last week, we brought it following a planning commission recommendation to not change the ordinance, but the planning commission already acted on the item, so.
So did we.
Right, and at the last council meeting, council asked to have it come back tonight. And I don't know what the
It was
actual
on-
motion, but it was on
It
last
was
week's
on
meeting.
It was on the business meeting in the end of November, and we got some late information. And instead of discussing it with the late information, the mayor made a recommendation to table it until the 5th. But I see what you're getting at.
So we really need to make it clear that this is two separate issues. So the Planning Commission has not landed on any signing zoning changes at all. We need to act on the variance. So Anne had been flexible with the timeline way back when we had first reviewed it. Now they've said we're done being flexible with timeline. They've asked us to act on it, and so that's why we had brought it back to the November meeting.
Did they know that that was going back to planning in December?
They weren't willing to wait.
Okay.
And, I mean, at some point, the city does have to act on this.
Right,
And
and-
so we
and-
asked them for more time, and they said no.
Okay, so just, I guess this came to us though in July?
Correct.
Okay, and then we technically had 60 days? I'm just trying to,
Well, they gave us time to allow the planning commission to review it.
okay.
We asked them to extend that. They did. It went to the planning commission October for the second review, and then the recommendation was to not change the ordinance.
Okay.
So
But
we-
Mark, that comes out of a discussion that has not been presented yet to council.
Yeah, right. It was presented only at a workshop, and there was no other.
But after the workshop, it went back to the Planning Commission. And I understand these are two different things, but one is contingent on the other. And we pushed it back to planning to say, give us a recommendation of what to do with the ordinance, with the code. We're waiting for that recommendation to come back to this body. We haven't got that yet.
And you will have an issue with timing if you don't act on it, is the problem. Because, we were asking for extension, which they were willing to do, but if they are no longer willing, at some point, we're recommending that the council take action because they're not willing to give you more time to consider it, which would be, potentially December, but there still wouldn't be an ordinance because their planning commission didn't present.
So the uncomfortableness for me here tonight is that you're going to ask me to make a decision without the input from Planning Commission because we don't have that recommendation back yet.
Well, I mean, we can give
There
you
it
the
is.
quick synopsis. They have not.
I'm not asking
moved
for
it.
this now. I want the presentation of that. It isn't coming back until next week. We messed up on the timing of this, guys. bad. Now, you're saying I've got to make a decision about this
No.
tonight based on that.
I think the council can push. I just, without the applicant being willing to extend your time, you are having an issue with timing.
Is the timing a legal thing?
Yes.
It is a legal thing.
And that's what I was trying to get to.
So we asked-
Where are we at?
Well, so we took action on the item in July, but we asked for them to give us an extension on the variance piece of the application. They said we are willing to work with you to allow it to go to planning commission to get considered. Went to planning commission 2 times. Planning commission's recommendation was no change, still no change, but I asked if they would allow us to go back after our workshop with the council. I asked the applicant, would they allow us more time to continue, and they said, no, we want action on the item, on the variance piece of the item. We already acted on the application, but we did not act on the variance. And so whether it has to happen tonight, whether it had to happen last week, I guess we talked to the city attorney, staff reviewed it, we asked the applicant what they wanted to do, and they said we'd like action on the item, which did come, out of planning commission already.
So we really have 2 options.
No, we
can-
have 3 options. Go
Okay.
ahead, I'm sorry.
You're good. No, so right now I was going to say that I see 2 options. We can leave it on the agenda for tonight, or it would go on the agenda for December 19th. And then we'd have,
I would strongly recommend against that at this point.
It's on the agenda.
Without a voluntary extension of that timeline from the applicant, we're pushing the boundaries of what.
and when was the first deadline? I understand they already gave 1 extension.
Well, we had asked them for a deadline in October.
Okay,
And
so
they-
we're well beyond.
We're well beyond what they gave us as kind of voluntary. We did go back and said it was reviewed, there was no action, they're gonna review it again. They said, okay, we're waiting, and then planning commission took no action again on the ordinance, and so we went back to them and said the direction was to go back again to the planning commission for a 3rd time, and they said, we're not willing to wait.
It's on the agenda. We can approve it, we can deny it, we can table it, correct? That's the 3 options.
Right, but I was just trying to see if we're leaving it on the agenda for tonight so we can get going with our meeting.
Right.
That's why I
Well-
was saying we have 2 options. Right. So you're
I've made my statement. I'm fine. Go ahead.
So leave it on, or are you recommending to remove it?
Nope. Leave it there.
All right, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor then of approving the agenda as is, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. All right, first item of business this evening is our public hearing, and I will turn that over to Clarissa.
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you to everyone who has attended, our Truth and Taxation meeting this evening. We have a fairly straightforward, maybe, presentation to show you, and I will kind of walk through the 2023 budget and levy, and certainly open it up to any questions you might have as we get going here. So, get this started. Thank you. Okay, so our outline for this evening, just a quick touch on purpose of budgeting, the budget and levy process, a few points in general about sort of what changed within the budget, and then we'll go through the detail of the levy, general fund budget and levy, and then the debt service levy. So the purpose of budgeting, there are numerous budgets, but generally, or numerous reasons. Generally, we want to account for today's costs, save for future needs, so that's our capital budgeting, and we want to prepare for known and unknown expenses. We want to decide how and where to invest financial resources. Obviously, our resources are fairly limited in a small community like ours, so we need to make some very conscious decisions about how we spend our money. Management and oversight of city operations, Budgets establish both a guideline and a policy. Hindsight is always 20/20. So what we're sort of taking our best guess at what our budget needs are for the year. So we can come up with budgets based on best guess and data, but often there are unknown expenses that come up throughout the year. Budgets are also a policy, so we utilize these budgets to sort of guide our individual decision making throughout the year, and then of course we are judged on that, both within us, me as a manager, the ratings organizations look at our actual budget to actual. It's in detail in our audit, et cetera, et cetera. And then just to show how the city uses public tax dollars, so just accountability and transparency. My personal number one goal of budgeting and levying is financial sustainability. We budget in line with policy and practices. We can then adjust policy and practices if we're not happy with the budget that produces. Again, unknown expenses come up throughout the year, and we just need to kind of leave some room for those. Maintaining general fund balances and building capital funds. So we've got our operations budgets, but then we also have our capital needs. And then we do have a requirement to maintain a particular general fund balance. Currently, our policy is 60%. Planning for capital improvements and special projects. We have a very detailed capital improvement plan at this point. My estimate is that we have roughly $400,000 per year on average over time of capital needs, streets, facilities, equipment, et cetera. And then, of course, long-term planning. How do our current operations and future needs look based on our current budget? So we have a long-term plan that goes out a good 25 years, and we can kind of track and estimate sort of where our pinch points are, where our capital needs fall short, and roughly what our tax rates will be throughout that time. Tax rates are, of course, dependent on tax capacity, so these are estimates at this time. Okay, so the budget process, very extensive. So when I say budget and levy, so obviously a big part of why we're here tonight is because people have received their tax statement estimates for next year. And so the assessment portion of this whole process actually starts in 2021 and goes through in that January-ish, February-ish. Feel free to correct me, somewhere in there. Those individual property values are estimated and mailed out to the property in the spring. We host our Board of Appeals and Equalization on those valuations in April, and then those final valuations are set somewhere in that June stage. June is usually when we begin our budget review, though we've been sort of tracking expenses and sort of noting various things throughout the year. We have had numerous discussions with the City Council in various forms, which took us to the September 26th preliminary levy adoption. That initial adoption was a 12.9% increase, I believe, which we have had then subsequent discussions, and we were directed, council would prefer a under 10%. Was it 12.9 or does that seem high? Was it 11.9? 12.09? I don't think it was 12.9. October 24th, the regular meeting, we adopted the JPA budgets for West Hennepin Public Safety and Maple Plain Fire Department. So we plugged those numbers in, and then the county sends out tax notices based on that preliminary levy percentage. So those went out in November, and that was also the notification for this truth in taxation hearing that we are at tonight. And then our plan is to, of course, adopt the final budgets and the levy on December 19th at the business meeting. So just a few quick budget points. I've got lots and lots of historical data that I could show. We've, of course, had rising market values and tax capacities within the city. We did have 5 years straight that we had steady levies, so that's part of the reason that we're seeing kind of a jump here the last couple of years. And we actually have decreased the tax rate substantially in the last few years. Moving forward sustainably, making sure that we're budgeting in line with policy and practices, maintaining that general fund balance. I did want to just kind of leave on here new management in 2021. So I started early 2021, and we've had a number of changes in processes. Even prior to my arrival, we adopted a new chart of accounts. So there's just kind of this overall shift that is still happening, which from a budget standpoint, when you're looking at the line item budget, you might see big jumps in certain departments, and it's not necessarily that the practice has changed. It's more of that we're trying to get those expenses into the right category, or maybe they were in a different department prior or whatever. And then sort of one of the bigger increases in the last couple of years have been some strategic investments in staffing. So for the police department, obviously to recruit and retain in a very, very competitive market, we had to do some substantial increases there. And then to build capacity and resilience within the city organization, we added a full-time staff member as well this year. So this chart is just showing the market value. So this is the median single-family home value. We had kind of the peak in 2008, followed by the recession, and then the post-recession growth has been pretty steady, and then some really significant increases here in the last couple of years. Overall average, actually, since 2012, so 10-year average is actually 10% per year. This is showing our levy history. It's really, really hard to see the colors here. Maybe it's just my old eyeballs, but general fund takes up the majority of our levy. We used to have an EDA levy, which they dropped in 2018. We have a debt levy that typically will just cover our larger reconstruction projects, and we've been steadily adding to that. It's been every 2 years, I believe, roughly, since that 2012, 2013, and then we did have a reconstruction last year, and then some significant projects this year as well. So, and then this year I've added the capital levy. I just want to be able to track those capital set-asides a little more cleanly and sort of dedicate to that CIP rather than doing transfers. Okay, so our running average, let's see, 2007 to 21 was 3.32. I guess I don't need to go through this all, but you guys have this information. Okay. So this is tracking the tax rate. We are currently estimating around 50, that says 52.7. I was estimating around 53.5, but I might have gotten the final data at 52.7. So, so you can see kind of at the top of that range there, what is that, 2015-ish? You peaked at about 78%, it looks like, and we are down to that 53-ish%, so almost 25% drop in tax rate in the last 7-ish years, 8 years. So for 2023, we are proposing a 9.9% increase. that again is down from that little over 12% in the preliminary. 20% of the increase is due to the increase in debt service. So we had the 3 added projects this year. And then 80% is due to general fund and capital levy changes. We'll note our 5-year average last year was 1.12 because the levy was held steady for those 5 years prior. Our 5-year average this year is up to 3.59. Okay, so this is, so budgets, typically we talk about budgets and a lot of times we're talking about expenditures, right? But it is important to note where our money comes from. So we are roughly 75% dependent on tax revenue to pay for city services. We are also strongly dependent on LGA. Accounts for about 15%, and we did see a significant drop in LGA this year. So we've lost about $35,000 in revenue for that. Or sorry, $33,000. We are counteracting some of our capital transfers with utilization of the ARPA money. So the ARPA money, we received roughly $215,000, I believe, which has to be used up in 3 years. So I'm just sort of dedicating it towards that capital fund as an easy sort of direct tie to that money. So there is $77,000 in revenue accounted for in this year's budget. There will be the same amount in next year's budget, and then we will lose that revenue then after that. Okay, so we'll go into a little bit more detail on each department or category. Generally, my strategy is budget accurately for current levels of service and any planned changes. So we have policies and practices that we utilize to run the organization, and then we have the known changes that we're already planning on proceeding with. Our overall general fund increase is about 9.73% over last year's budget. Those increases vary greatly between categories and departments. This is an overall view of the increases by department, at least major department. The percentage increase is often tied to the size of the budget to begin with. So within the city, our largest departments are by far administration and police. So we're looking at close to a 20% increase in administration, largely due to adding that staff member. And then police is looking at an 8%, again, largely to expand those wages and benefits. I usually try and look at our public works budgets sort of as a whole, public works, highways, streets, and then parks. And we're staying actually relatively steady, if not dropping a little bit on those 3 combined. And I lost my mouse here. Okay. So general government, you can see, includes council, we also call that executive, administration and finance, elections, and then legal, planning, city buildings also, and building inspections. So that accounts for, I didn't put a percentage on here, roughly a third of our budget overall. The overall budget effect for next year is a 20.35% increase. Here's the kind of the breakdown within that general government category. Elections is decreasing substantially, clearly because we're not having an election next year. Public safety includes both fire and police. So this is a slide specific to police. So some of the policy decisions and level of service. So the decision of the board has been to maintain the current level of service and staffing levels. We're also continuing to add to that capital fund. And again, we implemented those wage increases in order to compete with the market. Now this category, the department takes up about 36% of Maple Plains general fund budget, but we only pay in about 30% of the West Hennepin public safety budget, other than capital, which we are half. We contribute half of that. And then the overall increase for over 2022 is 8%. Fire, Maple Plain Fire Department, another JPA with independence. However, the city of Maple Plain manages that JPA. We've maintained, I don't think there's anything significant in changes. We're really, for the most part, are just addressing inflation. A lot of the equipment costs have increased substantially over the last year. And so that is accounting for a large portion of that increase. That's a 9% increase over 2022. So here's the summary of our public safety departments. Overall increase of 8.2%. Okay, so Public Works. Just to clarify, this is the general fund portion of Public Works. Public Works also, of course, takes care of our water, sewer, and storm. And so there's a large portion of those expenses are in those funds, which are not paid for with the general fund typically. So maintaining level of service, we have our people service contract. That contract increase is based on inflation as of April, so it ended up being an 8% increase over last year. We do have a new snow plowing contractor this year, so that is kind of one of those factors that we are really not sure of at this point. Obviously, snowfall is a big maybe in any budget cycle, but it's a little bit more so this year because of that new contractor. So overall, 2023 budget increases, about a 3.5% increase from last year. It counts for just under 14% of our general fund budget. Here's a quick summary. Okay, so capital and contingencies. So this is our sort of transfer over to the capital fund. So again, $77,000 of that ARPA money is being moved over to capital, and then that capital CIP is roughly, I think, $33,000, and that will also get deposited there. We have a contingency account, which we implemented last year to decrease some of our repair and maintenance items that were often budgeted but occasionally not utilized in full. So it was kind of an attempt at decreasing those operations budgets, but still leaving some money in the general fund just in case. Let's see if there's some quick changes. So overall budget effect, 10% decrease from last year. And this section does account for 6.5% of the general fund budget. Here's our quick summary. And then finally, debt service. Our levy increase of 9.9%. Again, debt service pays for our past investments, typically in reconstruction projects. This year we had 3 projects that we bonded for, the Highway 12 water main, our streets improvement project, the mill and overlay, and then our sewer lining project. So those are all combined into the one bond. And that's This is kind of our breakdown of those bond payments. And that's what I have as far as presentation. I would welcome any questions from council. And then also just a reminder, this is a public hearing, so we need to do that.
All right, thank you very much, of course, for that presentation. Any questions from council? All right, with that, I am looking for a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Moved by DeLuca,
Second.
second by Fay. Any further discussion? All in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion carries 5-0. The public hearing is open at 7:31 PM. Is there anyone here tonight to speak for the Truth in Taxation public hearing? If so, please come forward to the podium. Anyone here to speak for the Truth in Taxation hearing this evening? And the third and final time, anyone to speak tonight for the Truth in Taxation hearing? Okay. Having no one to speak, I'm looking for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Moved by Francis.
Second.
Second by Cahill. Any further discussion? Here, all in favor of closing the public hearing, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. The public hearing is closed at 7:32. Any further discussion or anything else from us, or we're good till the 19th?
Somebody has to ask a question.
I feel like we have been living budget since July.
12.02 was the preliminary increase, not 12.9.
Mayor, I have a comment.
Yes.
And this is really, Clarissa, directed at you. Thank you. You did some incredibly hard work this year on this budget, and it shows. It wasn't easy to pull what you did out of the budget. You found a way to do it in a respectful way. We put a lot of our resources towards our people, which is where it belongs in both fire, police, and our staff. I feel that it's very sustainable the way you've put this together, and really sets us up over the next few years to be able to continue that. Many, many cities around here had significantly larger increases than 9.9% overall. And when a significant piece of our budget is really fire and police, you did a good job of maintaining that, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. We actually just had a administrator management luncheon last week, and somebody pointed out average statewide of 9.1%. So even between big towns, little towns, 9.1%. So, everybody's fighting the inflation. Everybody's fighting police wages and that wage market. And so.
I too echo those Councilmember DeLuca's thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. All right, with that will move forward to our December council agenda. Are we good?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay, all right, we will move on to our next item of business. New business this evening, 1675 Spring Avenue sign application. And I will turn that over to our planner.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, Council. I know we've just briefly touched on this earlier in the meeting. So the City Council considered an application for a variance to allow an internally illuminated sign at their regular July 2022 City Council meeting. That was following consideration and a recommendation for approval by the city's Planning Commission to allow the sign to be internally illuminated. At the meeting of the City Council, there was discussion, there was a recommendation that we take action formally on the variance piece of the sign, but it was determined by the council to not take action that night and instead to act only on the sign itself, not the internally illuminated portion of the sign. And that was the variance request. So the city asked the applicant for additional time to consider reviewing an ordinance amendment, which would then potentially have allowed an internally illuminated sign. We had been talking to the applicant through the process. We notified them that it was going to go to the planning commission in September. We notified them after September's meeting that there was no decision or direction made. The planning commission asked that the item come back a second time. So it went back to the planning commission in October. They agreed to essentially allow that to happen. And so after the October meeting, there was again no recommendation to change the sign ordinance. There was actually a recommendation made by the planning commission to not change. So it was just a recommendation to not change the ordinance. We came to the city council in October at a workshop to just talk about that, talk about the process, talk about what next steps there might be. And there was direction from council to ask planning commission to think about reconsidering or talk if there was any other way that they could make a recommendation and or do something to the ordinance to allow a change to allow internally illuminated signs. So we went back to the planning commission again this month. Prior to us going back though, we had a conversation with the applicant and said you had agreed to give the city time to allow us to review the ordinance. We haven't gotten that done. Would you agree to allow additional time? That was prior to the last planning commission meeting. Their response was no, we want that to be acted on now. So that's why we put it on the next city council agenda. In looking at the timeline and looking at where we are, we need to do something with it. We talked to the city attorney. He agreed you guys need to do something with the variance piece. If the applicant's not willing to allow us to continue looking at it, we need to take formal action on that variance. And so that's why we brought it back when we did, which was before the last planning commission meeting. But we've since had another planning commission meeting. We can report back to you that the planning commission again made a recommendation to not change the sign ordinance. We asked the planning commission if they wanted to see a sign ordinance, if council directed a change in the sign ordinance, and I think there was just a general consensus that at this point they wouldn't have much insight beyond leaving the ordinance the way it is. So we haven't brought that back. Obviously, that wasn't tonight. Tonight was on this for whatever reason, and we're not saying council has to take any direction that you provide, but our recommendation to council, this is coming from staff and the attorney, is we should do something with this. In talking to the applicant, they don't want to wait anymore. They want to know what they can do. They don't have a sign. The idea that they'd put up the sign with a light source that they may or may not be able to plug in, they'd rather not deal with that. They'd like to either get the sign that they want or know that they can't get that sign. And I don't know at the end of the day if they're going to be okay with not getting that sign. They're pretty adamant that they want this sign, but at least in our conversations. So I did prepare some additional information. I did talk to the applicant some more. As you know, Planning Commission's recommendation was to approve the variance based on the requirement that there was a corporate standard that the applicant had to comply with. We know from our discussion, our meeting, that wasn't necessarily the case, that the corporate identity issue was not a kind of hardline requirement. It was a recommended requirement. So when I talked to the applicant, I asked them if they could give me some other things that would be considered as a hardship or that would be unreasonable in terms of trying to comply with the city's current ordinance. In talking to them, they said that the other insurance company in town was allowed to have an internally illuminated sign on a different building. They said there's a competitive disadvantage to them not being able to also be illuminated internally. They also noted that their proximity to the commercial or the industrial district, the I industrial district, they're right on the doorstep at Hallgren Road on Highway 12. Businesses that are on Highway 12 are allowed to have illuminated signs. They thought the proximity that they are to that district versus to other downtown businesses lent itself to being a reason as to why the city would consider or could consider a variance. And so the information that's presented The city can choose to adopt, not adopt a resolution approving. If we don't, it would be recommendation to deny. I just don't know what they'll do with that. They're really concerned about the fact that the city has allowed other businesses that they consider to be comparable to internally illuminate, and they're not being allowed. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. You don't have to take action, but we think there needs to be, the more time we go, the worse the gray area gets between what they agreed to and where we are, and we think it should be moved.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Fay, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh, I got plenty. More comment than question, Mark. I want to extend the apologies, my apologies, our apologies to Ann and the American family, because this is a process, obviously, that should have been completed a couple of months ago. But unfortunately, we kept sending it back to the Planning Commission, seeking a different result from the same set of facts. And if we have charges from staff time post October 1st, I would consider that we waive those and not burden Ann and her American family with staff charges after our 60-day window, quote unquote, expired. It appears that the chess pieces from July until today keep moving, and now we're in the middle of a marketing campaign, and in regard to the chamber and its members and the letters that we got, I don't want to get into a fight over their interpretation of the Planning Commission denying American Family's request. The Planning Commission approved the variance request at their July 14th meeting. It was based on hardship, which included a condition that a letter be submitted by the American Family Corporate Office that showed that an alternate lighting source was not permitted. That letter never materialized. So then the City Council comes in, no longer having a viable application due to hardship. What normally would be a black and white variance process turned gray when council said, let's give them another peek. So a month later, the Planning Commission did exactly what they were tasked to do. Council directed staff and the Planning Commission to consider revising the current sign ordinance. They weren't directed to change it. They were asked to review it and consider revising it. And we keep talking about the go ahead and build the sign, but don't turn it on. We keep forgetting to say there was one more component of that condition that the council approved, and that was that the Planning Commission would consider revising the current ordinance to reflect that. They never have. Through 3 times, 2 formal and 1 informal, they have denied that request. What they have determined over the course of the 3 meetings, that even though these guidelines are 15 years old, they're still relevant, and they were created from an extensive amount of public input and procedure. They concluded that the design guidelines and city code were still valid, but haven't been extensively utilized due to the lack of development or redevelopment. And on top of it all, they were uncomfortable with a group of 6 or 7 planning commissioners rewriting guidelines that were originally created and vetted by a professional design team and over 100 residents through a very lengthy public review process. Now, if we proceed with this resolution tonight, and I don't like how this resolution has been written, it's going to be based on 3 or 4 city council members changing what has been deemed as an acceptable standard in the city's design characteristics. The one that was created by over 100 previous residents, staff, and council in public forums. I'm just not comfortable with that. And if you think I'm mistaken about internal illumination, what it will do to a small town thoroughfare, that is Highway 12, I implore you to drive out to Highway 55 through Rockford at night. You'll start at the east end at a Holiday Station store, just like the city of Maple Plain, lit up like the 4th of July, and as you move west, you'll hit businesses and strip malls with illuminating signs that are every color of the rainbow. And the whole idea behind the design guidelines was to not allow that to happen and to avoid it. So I implore you, if you're not comfortable doing anything tonight, table it. But I'm not comfortable approving this variance as it's written tonight. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Fay. Any other comments or discussion?
Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember DeLuca?
since this is on the agenda, I'll discuss it, give you my thoughts. And I gotta say, I'm at a loss, guys, on this one. And I'm going back, reading the minutes from the July meeting. Council directed staff to approve the sign. This was under the variance discussion. We understood that there wasn't a hardship at the time, which was what Councilmember Fay nicely pointed out was what came from Planning Commission. Approval was subject to the proposed sign complying with all standards of the revised sign ordinance. I think there was a feeling that at some point that sign ordinance would be varied. We haven't got to that piece yet. The sign couldn't be eternally illuminated. In essence, and I don't know why there's a confusion here, we approved a variance, but just with some conditions in July. She chose not to put her sign up because she didn't want to have a plug. And as you said, the sign mark she wanted. You used those words. The hardship didn't exist in July, and it still doesn't exist, guys, today. If we want to go back and change the sign ordinance or the guidelines, that's this council's right to do. But until such time that that is done, our very code says the only way you can approve a variance, and it's right in your report, Mark, says based on a hardship. What's she listed for hardships now? A competitive disadvantage becomes a hardship that the council has to take into account? Sorry, I'm not buying that one. Second, we're close to areas that would allow it. That's how we're going to write ordinances from now on? I don't see I don't see a hardship here. I don't know how we could in conscience change what we've already approved, which is you can have your sign, just can't be eternally illuminated.
Thank you, Councilmember DeLuca. Anybody else? Comments?
Some comments. So we've talked about this a lot and definitely put a lot of thought into it. And the more I've thought about it and listened to planning's feedback and resistance to changing the guidelines, it's occurred to me that perhaps the problem is not with the guidelines, because I do love the design guidelines they've come up with. But perhaps the problem is with how we've drawn our zones. This property is located just 2 doors down from the motel, which has a giant eternally illuminated sign. Another 2 doors down from our city illuminated sign. We have a precedence of making variances for illuminated signs on Highway 12. And so perhaps we shouldn't be asking planning to reconsider the guidelines, but reconsider how the zone is drawn. Now, I don't like to govern through variances, and I think the timing is unfortunate, but I believe allowing this internally illuminated sign follows our precedents. I think it fits with the other businesses on Highway 12. And I do think it is a hardship when you have another insurance company in town that has one, and you don't get to have one. So for those reasons, I am going to support it tonight. I don't particularly like supporting variances, but I think we do need to reconsider at least our zoning, if not our ordinance. I'd rather go through that way. But given the unfortunate timing, I will be supporting the illuminated sign tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember Cahill. Councilmember Francis, who's also our planning liaison, do you have anything to add or thoughts?
It's a difficult subject. I like the idea of the internally illuminated sign. In that planning commissions, I don't even remember who it was, brought up the idea of making a zone, like an overlay, saying businesses along 12 have this special set of rules that would allow the signs. Planning commission didn't like that idea, but the idea was brought up. And maybe that's something we need to consider for in the future. Because her sign would be facing towards the highway and not at homes. And like Councilmember Cahill brought up, there's plenty of examples going down Highway 12. And we're dealing with someone that has owned a business here for many, many years. At her former location, she had an internally lit sign. She chose to build new, create a development in our city with a nice new building. I don't see a problem with letting her have the sign.
Do you recall the discussion with the Planning Commission where they pointed out that September of '21, when we first got the preliminary package for the plat review and what have you, that the front elevation of that building included gooseneck lighting with a flat sign, no internal illumination. Part of the design guidelines are that a sign package is supposed to be submitted with that preliminary plat approval. It didn't. The building was built weeks shy of getting its certificate of occupancy, and we got a sign package that had a internally illuminated sign. She has not wavered from an internally illuminated sign since, and I'm not quite sure why, because a 5-minute Google search will give you some of the most beautiful American family signs that are ornate with gooseneck lighting or back or halo lit with uplighting or downlighting. She just has not wavered. She claims that she has to have that sign, and I don't know what it is about that style of sign that she has. I'm telling you, if we approve this variance, you're never going to put the genie back in the bottle. And the agreement that we have with the John Q. Building and those sign owners, gone. The agreement that we have with Spikes and the Ace Hardware illuminated sign, gone. Those that we've turned down in previous years, such as Liquor Depot, disenfranchised. And the future development of the Highway 12 corridor, just like downtown Rockford. And we're setting ourselves up here in a very, very slippery slope, in that you do this one, you're never going to pull it back. Never going to pull it back. You're never going to get what you want out of the John Q. Building. You're never going to get anything else out of anything along the Highway 12 corridor. And we tried to take a stance with the John Q. Building. I think we finally succeeded in that with some paperwork. It's unfortunate, yes, that they are where they are right now, but let's establish a precedence, let's establish a criteria, and move forward. There is a process for completing and submitting a variance, and that is due to a hardship. And I do not agree with the hardships that have been presented. They've changed every month that this has been in front of the city council.
I appreciate and acknowledge as well that this has been very challenging for all of us, and the time that has been put into it. And, you know, have been listening to everyone and trying to keep up to date. I do think one thing that we are forgetting is that this business has been in town and has had the same sign on Highway 12. So that's part of my challenge with this, is it's been there. And as Councilmember Cahill already pointed out, looking where the sign is now, there's two signs right, illuminated signs right by them. And then also, as the applicant pointed out, the possible disadvantage with the other insurance agency on Highway 12 being able to have the illuminated sign. And after considerable time and listening to all of this, will as well be voting for it. But I do think, as some have already pointed out, that this is a bigger issue. I mean, the letters that we received from the chamber president on behalf of representing 30 businesses or so in the chamber, I don't know the exact membership. We've had this happen, was it about 3 years ago with the Beef Council? I mean, it continues to come up and cost business owners money, staff people money, our staff resources. We need to find a way to make this work. We need to be welcoming to business, and I feel like we sometimes are creating the hardship on our businesses. And we need to find a way to work together and to maintain the look of the city while being realistic. For those reasons, I will be voting for it, and I do think we need to look at this at a whole different level at another time. And I too echo Councilmember Cahill. It's unfortunate that in DeLuca that we need to make this decision now, because I wish it could be done with partnership with planning and not in a variance, because I'm just not a fan of variances
Mayor,
either.
there will be no need to change anything in the future, because with the stroke of a pen tonight, if this variance is approved, there will be no need to make changes, because everyone will get whatever sign that they elect. They'll come in and they'll request a variance, and the variance will be, you granted the variance here. How can you deny me? And I'm saying, put a line in the sand and be done with it, put a fork in it, and let's move on.
But to me, this isn't a variance, this is grandfathering. This business has been in town since I have been a child, and it's
change
been
the rules.
I don't know what else to call it.
I
mean, it's-
grandfathering, I don't see anywhere in any documentation that has anything to do with grandfathering.
And I do agree with the hardship that the other insurance business on Highway 12 has an illuminated sign. That's a disadvantage.
Well, and we keep making references to the Q building. Let's understand some of the history of how that Q building got there. The very first sign came at a time when previous staff perhaps wasn't paying as much attention to things. And then as businesses were added, they kept coming in and said, well, the other side of the building has an illuminated sign, so we have. I've gone through 3 or 4 of those sign variances. And I think if you go back, you'll actually see that there was extensive discussion every time one of those came in. And Mark, you did you've been on here long enough. You've been through most of those cycles. And it was very clear at one point that this council had put down a direction that we've had enough of the variances of these. You have to go back to the hardships. I can't see the hardship here other than she wants that. I am struck by the fact that the original site plan review had the gooseneck signs on it. Very, very clear. As such, therefore, Mayor, I would move that we deny this variance.
There's a motion on the table to deny the sign variance at 1675 Spring. Is there a second?
I will second that.
All in favor of denying the sign variance at 1675 Spring, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I heard two. Opposed, signify by saying aye.
No.
Aye.
All right. So it did not pass 2-3 to deny it. All right.
Based on the justifications in the packet and that I gave earlier, I will move to approve a resolution approving the request by Ann Rothstein for a variance to allow an internally illuminated building wall sign to be located at the new building of 1675 Spring Avenue.
There is a motion by Councilmember Cahill to approve the resolution approving the request by Ann Rothstein for a variance to allow an internally illuminated building wall sign to be located on the new building at 1675 Spring Avenue. All those in favor signify by saying
Mayor?
aye.
You need a second.
Oh, sorry. That's why I read that. Looking
That's
for
all
a
right.
second.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Francis. All those.
Is there any discussion?
Well, I felt like we already did that. Is there any further discussion?
Well, I'd just like to clarify, Councilperson Caitlin's motion made reference to based on the materials in the packet. In my contention, the materials in the packet do not support a variance. Quite on the contrary, I think the materials as presented by the planner would show that there is no hardship, and based on the fact that there's no hardship, there cannot be a vote in favor of a variance, in my opinion.
In
Thank you,
addition,
Councilmember
the
DeLuca.
original motion to approve the sign was based on the ordinance being changed, which is why we sent it to the Planning Commission twice. So there is no underlying jurisdiction that meets the criteria. We can't just, there's no teeth in that ordinance or
But
that
the-
resolution that you put together.
The Planning Commission also recommended approval of the variance, despite not wanting to change the ordinance. So that is what I'm referencing, is the Planning Commission's
In the
work
very
and recommendation to approve this variance.
The Planning Commission's original approval on July 14th was to approve the variance based on a hardship. And the hardship was that the corporate American Family Office
Required.
would required internally illuminated signs and would make no concessions for anything other than. Smartly, the Planning Commission asked for a letter from the corporate office to, in fact, get that into the record. And within 2 weeks, at our city council meeting, when we went to approve that variance, that letter never materialized. And what happened was, it wasn't a requirement of American Family. We started to hear things like, well, if you want to be a model agency, you have to have an internally illuminated sign. If I'm going to mature as a practice, I have to have an internally illuminated sign. Hence, the hardship went away.
My decision is not based, or my motion is not based on those previous proposals. It is based on the recommendation dated November 28th that planning, even after meeting twice, still recommends approval of this variance. It's right here on page 89 of our packet. And so I believe that they recognize that we have granted these, and it, like I said, I don't like governing by variance, but we're at a point where we need to reconsider. We have so many internally illuminated signs, whether or not we are going to continue to make variances or look at the problem that we have.
You keep saying the Planning Commission recommended.
Yes, page 89. The Planning Commission reviewed the request and recommended approval to the City Council of the applicant's variance. So it's,
That was the original,
Did-
that was the original review and approval. There wasn't
they
any, they
revoke
never
that?
considered it again.
yeah, so their approval stands. They never took it back even after 2 times of discussing.
Based on the hardship that they had originally done. Mayor, I called a question on this.
Di- Did you want, Clarissa, staff was trying to speak. Do you still call or? Okay, all right. Question's been called, so that means we need to vote on the motion made by Councilmember Cahill to approve a resolution approving the request by Ann Rostein for a variance to allow an internally illuminated building wall sign to be located on the new building at 1675 Spring Avenue. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Nay.
Motion carries 3-2. Having no other business to come before us this evening, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Councilmember DeLuca, motions to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Francis, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, the meeting's adjourned at 8:06.